Hi, my name is Finn,
My name is Theron.
and today we are talking about.
Psychology in sports.
And here we are. Well, thank you for coming on there.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
We were just talking a lot about Western and about your subject because we were just waiting for the show to start, and it turned out the show kind of already started without us because we were rolling. But tell me a little bit about. We'll get into your. I want to give a lot of time to talk about your topic, so we might skip some of the normal questions that we usually go over on the show. But I would love to know more about you, about where you're from, and what you're studying at Western.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm from Tacoma. So I went to Stadium High School, which I always tell people if you've seen the movie 10 Things I Hate About You, it was filmed there at my
Really?
school. Yeah.
I just saw that movie for the first time last
Really?
week. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when like Heath Ledger's like running on those steps,
Yeah?
like
That's your school?
that's my school.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And those steps are as dangerous as they look.
They
I will
did
tell you.
look really
Yeah,
dangerous,
I
yeah.
was on the football team in high school for just 1 year,
Mm-hmm.
but in middle school we would go to the high school every once in a while, our marching band, and actually walk down those steps. And I had a bass drum that I couldn't see over, and I had to walk down those steps
That's really
with
scary.
a bass drum attached to me, like a back harness. So it's like pulling me forward with the weight because the harness is in the front and just loops onto your back with these like big metal hooks with foam pads, and so it's pulling me forward, and I can't
just
see in front of me. And
Start
it's
rolling.
the same steps Heath Ledger was on, which if you've seen, well, you've seen the movie, but
Yes.
if you've seen the movie, big
Big
concrete,
steps.
big,
Big
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm from Tacoma, and I've always been interested in sports, but as I mentioned, with just the 1 year football, I'm not very good. So I always figured my passion for sports would end up with me like covering it, which is my major journalism. I'd love to cover sports for a living, any way I can. Writing, interviewing players, that sort of thing. And I've played soccer my whole life. I'm still on a rec team now, so I still play sports, but again, not not very good.
Yeah.
Just for fun. But that does lead to our topic today of just things about sports I find interesting outside of just the playing of the sports.
Yeah. And so we met 2 years ago, actually, because we were on the same beat team
Yeah.
on the front. We were both covering campus news.
Yeah.
And then I feel like we've run into each other intermittently since then. We've had a couple classes. We have several mutual friends. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
it's fun.
I feel like I'm always seeing you around campus in the most random of times. Let's see. Yeah, I know we had like a film class, history of samurai and
History
film,
of
which
Samurai.
was
That was cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Cool
was
class.
neat. And I'm always seeing. It's funny because I'm so used to seeing your name next to photos and publications, like particularly the front. I'd always see like a picture that was really well taken and the name Finn. So when I saw Cascadia Daily had a guy named Finn and really good pictures, I just assumed it was you. And I remember being like, "Hey man, nice pictures in Cascadia." You're like, "That's a different Finn." So
I do know that Finn went. He's a great guy. And takes really good photos. But yes, not me.
yeah,
At least not yet. But yeah. Yeah, I feel like I see you around quite a bit as well. I know you're active in the theater department, which
yes,
I know several people involved in that. So yeah. But I think we should honestly just jump right into the main topic
sweet.
because I'm super interested. And you've already teased it a little bit. So psychology in sports. You were right before the show, and I would love for you to expand on this. We were talking about how the way people talk about sports viewers
Yes.
in the United States, I should say. Well, I guess we can talk about internationally, but I think we were both talking about in a U.S. context how mental health of athletes is viewed and talked about and prioritized from the viewership standpoint, and then obviously how that intersects with the athletes themselves. So tell me a little bit about what you find interesting about this topic and what the issues that you're I guess most concerned about or most thinking to be talked about the most.
Right. And so I will say, as a kid growing up playing sports, there was always a large divide between like what some coaches would say and what say other coaches and what my parents would say, which was like as a kid, my parents always taught me to like prioritize like your own mental health and making sure you're taking care of yourself, and they're very supportive, which I really appreciated, which was something that like going into the sports world even at the age of like middle school was juxtaposed heavily with some of the coaches who were very of a staunch tough it out type
Mm-hmm.
mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember once there's this memory that will always stick with me. I played on a middle school football team. It wasn't for the school, but it was middle school age, like and outside of the school. Practice every night. You have games against other teams, and it wasn't like a rec league. It was like an actual league, but I was just the kicker, so I was just kind of hanging out most of the time, kicking footballs in the background, and they were practicing. Like snapping the ball. So you had the center, and he was snapping the ball to the quarterback, and he was this really big, tough kid
Mm-hmm.
named like Trey Davis, who went to my elementary, middle, high school. He was a great player. He was one of the better players on the football team in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And as they were lined up, the coach is just shouting the normal things, and Trey messes up a snap. And the coach gets in his face and is like, "Do not mess up the snap. You have one purpose. You have one job. Your one purpose in life is to snap the football. Do not miss the snap of the football," and just like screaming top of his
Right,
lungs in it, like grabbing his face mask of his helmet, like
Really?
yelling into his face.
That's terrible.
Yeah, and it was the wording of it, your one purpose in life is to snap the football. Obviously he
Right.
means in the context of the football field, but I mean it was, and after that, I mean Trey almost never messed up. I guess in the coach's mind it worked, but it just felt brutal, even to just experience, secondhand just
Yeah.
watching it.
Especially for, I mean, kids.
Yeah, kids.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that made me a weird kid was how my parents described it. Like, 'cause I played soccer as a kid, and when I was really young, I was actually pretty good for my age.
Uh-huh.
And so I was on like a club team. They call it like selector. It was like a year-round team.
Right, like
Um.
the Bellingham version of that was called Rangers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I remember, I know what you're talking about.
Right. So before I transitioned to just playing rec and more for fun. And I remember the coaches would yell a lot because that's what they do.
Yeah.
And I was the only kid on the team who would yell back, which was yes. If I had a coach go
Wow.
like, "Do it right," I'd be like, "What do you mean? I was doing my best," that sort of thing. Or it was very dumb. And so, of course, I remember when I was like really little, there was like levels, and it was usually by age. We could get moved up, and I got moved up to like the top of it's like the 3 levels, and I got sent back down for yelling back at the coach. And yeah, and my mom always thought it was. I mean, she's probably a little embarrassed because your kid's yelling at the coach, but I think she found it at least a little bit funny because I don't think she ever really loved that coaches like yell at kids that way. And if I did something I thought was correct and the coach didn't like it, I thought it was unfair, I would tell him
Right.
in the same tone he yelled at me, like, and that's just not something you do. Whether the coach is in the right or wrong doesn't matter. When you're a kid and your coach yells at you, you
So
go,
you're not
"Yes,
supposed
coach."
to do that.
You're not supposed to do that. Again, I probably has a little bit to do with the neurodivergency, maybe, of like
Sure.
just not understanding my role socially as like the one who's supposed to be learning from the coach.
Like, hey, this person's
But
yelling at me. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
gonna
like
yell
that.
back at you.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
what my parents
No, that makes sense.
like. My mom was like, I don't think you would have made it in the sports world even if you were really committed because you just don't deal well with that, like with getting yelled at,
Yeah.
which is funny. But it got me very interested in like that kind of dichotomy between a lot of, I would argue, it doesn't have to do with age necessarily, but the kind of old way of thinking where it's like the tough it out, the like, work through the pain, no pain, no gain type thing, where generally you have coaches being very harsh and kind of pushing you really, if you've ever seen like the movie Whiplash.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you're like pushing someone to the brink, yelling at them, that kind of motivation, the stick versus the carrot, I guess.
Right.
And while, there are examples, I imagine, of it working where when you push them really hard, they become successful.
Yeah.
I just don't think the ends justify the means there. And I
Sure.
think there are plenty of examples of athletes who haven't experienced that, who also become successful. And it's not required to scream at them or berate them.
Right. Well, it's that
know.
line between fostering discipline
Mm-hmm.
and like verbal abuse or emotional abuse.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And particularly once you've made it pro, the discussion, particularly from fans, becomes very interesting to me. We have a lot of fans talking about, especially when athletes speak up about mental health, like the very like, do your job, just play ball, shut up,
Yeah.
versus the like,
Shut up and dribble.
shut
Is
up and
the
dribble,
phrase I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard that. And that gets used gets used when players talk politics and when players just speak out
Right.
about mental health,
Right.
focusing more on the mental health. But
When
it
players get
applies to
out of
both.
their
Yeah,
lane.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so like one example, and this is off the top of my head, so
Sure.
the details, might not quite be there, but dropped out of the Olympics.
Oh, I remember. Yes, I
Yeah, and
remember
I believe
this.
she cited like mental health as a reason to take a break.
It's like 1 or 2 years ago. Or
Yeah,
something.
it was pretty recent. I think, oh gosh, we're coming up on the 2024 Olympics, so probably a solid 4 years
Yeah.
ago now, which doesn't sound right, but
Was it really?
I know, right? Because I think it was Summer Olympics and this year's Summer Olympics.
Oh, you know why it seems different is
Was it
because
a COVID thing?
yeah, the 2020 Olympics were in 2021.
That's right. So 3 years. That's right.
But yeah, so I remember
correct.
this. I remember
Yeah,
this.
but so she cited mental health as the reason. I remember it was a big controversy. A lot of people were very, very upset and thought, tough it out, just keep like, what are you can't drop out because of mental health. And it's funny because we're talking about, I mean, she already had multiple gold medals at that time.
Right.
She's at the
Superstar.
superstar at the top of her career. And, people, no offense to them, but sitting on their couches at home watching her win gold medals, are
Yeah.
the one telling her, you can't do that. You need to keep going. You can't
Yeah.
take care of your mental health, And I remember reading a Sports Illustrated article about Noah Lyles, who's been on an incredible run recently. He's, I would argue, the favorite to win the gold medal in the 100-meter and the 200-meter, possibly both, this upcoming Olympics. And he had, I think a couple months ago, it's called like the Diamond League, the like league where all the track athletes race against each other when it's not the Olympics. There's like the yearly thing. Hopefully I'm not getting the details wrong, but I know it's like they still it's very highly competitive, even though it's not the Olympics. And Noah Lyles, during an event, I think it was a couple months ago, but it was at least in the last few years between these most recent Olympics, won both the 200-meter and the 100-meter, which is something very rare. Usain Bolt did it, but I think outside of him, I think Noah Lyles is either the only or one of the only to do it since.
Yeah.
And there was a Sports Illustrated article I remember reading a few years ago before all that happened, where he talked about his depression and how before he was on medication, his depression was overwhelming. He was really struggling. And once he started taking medication and getting help, he got significantly better. And that's what led up to that run where he's now on the top of the world right now. He
Yeah.
is literally the best in the world at the moment. And I think that's what gets missed a lot when, say a Gabby Douglas drops out and says, I need to take care of my mental health, as people are missing that there's like real concrete examples of athletes taking care of their mental health and then
And then
performing better.
Performing better. Yeah.
so
yeah.
the idea of like you can't take care of your mental health as an athlete, you have to just tough it out. I mean, while sure maybe you're showing grit and toughness, you might start performing worse as an
Sure.
athlete. So it
I would
seems like
expect them to,
why in
yeah,
the
that would make
world,
sense.
what is as a fan would you argue for that
Right.
when it's going to get a worse performance out of, I assume, an athlete or a team you're rooting for?
Well, I think it's this, and I think I'm seeing a little bit of this with what you're describing the coaches, is that it's a very extractive
Mm-hmm.
relationship that people are building up, whether it's
Yeah.
coaches, bad coaches, I should say,
Bad coaches.
or bad viewers,
Mm-hmm.
and they're building up like a parasocial thing in their head,
Right.
where it's like you're here to perform
Mhm.
for me,
Right.
and whatever your emotional state doesn't matter
Mhm.
because you're here to perform for me,
Right.
which is of course not the dynamic.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
So yeah, I see that parallel there.
I would definitely agree. I think it can be very. I mean, I'm a fan. It's very easy. I get upset when my team loses. I get happy when my
course,
team
yeah.
wins. Of course. But I think like, and this is a very common thing. Also, I shouldn't say common, but it's a thing I see where when an athlete messes up in a big way, fans will, because now with social media, we'll interact with them directly.
Mhm.
I remember, and I believe this was last season, and I forget his name, unfortunately, because he's not a star player, and I don't follow the Packers. They're not my team. But the Packers were facing the Colts, I'm pretty sure. And I remember the game ended on a fumble. This player who's not normally like the go-to guy,
Mhm.
I think it was kind of one of those plays where like, they're really heavily covering the star, and so you have to throw to someone else. They threw the ball to a player who's not normally expected to be the star guy to make the big play because he was open, and he fumbled the ball, and that lost them the game. And I remember, this was definitely a Packers-Colts game. I'm pretty sure it was a Packers player who fumbled. It could have been a Colts, to be honest. This is a bit ago. But what I remember very vividly is that player after the game getting death threats over social media, and a substantial enough amount that I remember he either like took his Instagram down
Yeah.
or like blocked comments, or there was some news story about how he had to like make a change in his social media page because he was getting a substantial amount of death threats. And
Right.
I do understand, like, yes, it's the internet. Yes, you can take down your social media, but I just don't think that's justified. Like, why are you as a fan sending a person, a real human being, death threats for, and again, I say this as a very passionate fan,
Yeah.
a game. It is a game.
Yeah.
It's a
Someone who is ostensibly just trying their best.
yeah, right?
And
it
it didn't
obviously
work out.
exactly.
But
And I think that's like actually a
they're
good
not like
point.
a bad person or whatever.
Yeah, I wasn't even
Yeah.
going to bring that up, but that's a good point. It wasn't intentional. That's
Yeah.
a big part of it. Is it was clearly he was trying his best. He wanted to win. He made a mistake, a physical mistake, just let go of the ball. That cost him the game. I mean, I guarantee you he's upset about it enough as is. I don't think
Yeah.
you need as a
Yeah,
fan to
yeah,
let
yeah.
him know that you hope he dies or whatever because you're upset that he messed up.
It's interesting you bring this specific situation up because I am not a big I don't not like sports. I
Right.
enjoy watching football, but I'm
Mhm.
not like tapped into that world.
Yeah.
But I went to my first Seahawks game
Ooh.
in December, and they were playing the Eagles, and it
Mm.
was a great game. The Seahawks got winning touchdown. Both teams played really well.
Yes.
And then the Seahawks scored a winning touchdown like the last 45 seconds.
I think this was Drew Lock to Jackson
Yes,
Smith and
it
Jigba.
was so was Drew Lock the Seahawks person or was that the Eagles person?
Yeah, he was the. Well, it's funny because you might know this, but our normal Seahawks quarterback is Geno Smith, and I can't remember
Okay.
exactly. I believe he was injured that game. I think it was even during the game he got injured, and Drew Lock, our backup
So it was
QB
Drew
at the
Lock, okay.
time, stepped in and he threw the game-winning touchdown in that game.
Right,
if I remember
so-
correctly.
There was this I noticed because I watched that game
Mhm.
and because it was so thrilling.
Mhm.
That like on the way home I was like, "Oh, I'm going to like look online and see what commentators are saying."
Right.
And look online and see what people are saying about
Mhm.
this game because this was really cool. Like
was
I
a
really
great
enjoyed my
game.
experience.
Yeah.
It was a great game. And I was shocked. Well, I saw a little bit of this in the stadium from people and what they were saying. But I was shocked at the vitriol
Ooh.
that people had for whoever the quarterback of the whole narrative that seemed to form was like Eagles could have won that. They played really bad.
Mm.
They totally handed it to the Seahawks because of this, that, and the other thing. I don't remember. But
Right.
a lot of blame was on one specific player from the Eagles. I think it was the quarterback.
Oh,
Or maybe
Jalen
the running
Hurts.
back.
If it was the quarterback,
Yes,
Jalen Hurts.
it was. What's his name? Taylor Hurts.
Jalen Hurts.
Jalen Hurts. Yes. Now I'm all like.
Oh, awesome! I'm glad I could help.
Jalen Hurts. People were just trapped. Like I didn't see death threats, but like just like really, really mean. Like, oh, this guy's a joke. This guy is like he's such a bad player. He didn't
Right.
need to, he cost the Eagles that game. Be really denigrating the skill of a guy who's probably one of the best football players in the country, in the world. Obviously, he's in the NFL. He's
Right.
a quarterback for an
Yes.
NFL team. So he is at the top of the best of the best.
Mhm.
And it was a close game.
It was a close game.
But not being involved in that world and then entering that. And I know this
Right.
was right after a game is very a close
Of
one.
course.
I'm always saying a sliver of what people are saying.
Mhm.
But it was a lot. There was a lot of like emotional response, specifically like very, very toxic like anger
Yeah.
that I was pretty surprised to see. So I relating to what you said earlier. That's
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wasn't planning on talking about this, but because it's on topic, I'll get into just a little bit.
Sure.
I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of viral videos of when fans get really upset
yeah.
at the outcome of a game at their team
Little
at a
bit,
certain
yeah,
moment.
but I
and
can
like,
imagine.
if you've ever seen like a video of a fan breaking a TV, I don't know
Yeah.
if you've ever seen that. I've seen a lot
I've
of
seen
those.
a couple. I've seen a couple like
Right.
on whatever on
And yeah, and you can
YouTube
kind
or
of see how that direct type of anger gets
yeah.
transmitted towards the players in an online format. But I will say, and again, my credentials here, as like a passionate fan. I mean, it's very
Sure,
subjective,
Sure,
but
sure.
I'm the kind of person who, if it's like a very close game, I remember I'm a big soccer fan. Well, I'm American, I call it soccer, but
Yeah.
there was it was the Nations League final of the first ever Nations League, so I believe 2021, between the U.S. men's national team and the Mexican men's national team, and very big rivalry. And that game went so in the format that was in, which is I believe the pretty standard format now, is you play a full 90 minutes. If it's still tied, you go an extra 30, and if it's still tied, you go to penalty kicks.
Mhm.
And I think it was nearing that 120th minute mark. It's then that 30 minutes of extra time because the game was tied. Christian Pulisic, our star player, stepped up to take a penalty kick, and we're talking maybe like I think 10, 15 minutes left in the game,
Mhm.
and he nails it. Like he sinks it top corner. I'm running around my room screaming. Like I'm genuinely screaming. Like
Yeah.
yeah, right. And just minutes later, and we're talking like the last I think 2 minutes of the game, the Mexican team gets a penalty kick. And I'm thinking
Oh.
like, oh, we're so screwed, right? And he steps up to take it. And at this point in the game, our starting keeper at the time, Zach Steffen, was injured during the game, and our backup keeper at the time, Ethan Horvath, stepped in. So this is the
Yeah.
backup keeper has to make a penalty kick save, which I do want to get into penalty kick statistics later, but
Sure.
genuinely, a penalty kick is at least over 50% generally in any league at any time. A penalty kick you expect to go in more often than not, especially against a backup keeper. As a fan, you're expecting it to go in. And Ethan Horvath makes an incredible save, like unbelievable save, and that gives us the win. And I'm once again running around my room
Right.
screaming, like genuinely screaming. Like I understand passion. When my team loses, I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Like I'm crazy. But even me, I'm never going to break a TV over it.
Yeah.
And I'll even in my past, especially when I was younger, I was worse. I've broken like video game discs. I think I broke a controller once. Like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
But I would never think of sending a death threat to an athlete because they messed up.
I think
You
that's
know?
it's the line between like frustration
Mm-hmm.
at like
Right.
when there's a game, let's say a really close
Mm-hmm.
thing, and you can see how you can win
Right.
and it doesn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
I have been there a little bit like high
Right.
school games. There's been a couple
Mm-hmm.
situations where I've been like, oh, we almost
Yeah. Right.
and it's
Mm-hmm.
very frustrating. But I think the line is like frustration versus like hate. Or
Yeah.
not, maybe hate's a strong word. Well, if you're saying someone a death threat, but like
Yeah. That's
the like I don't know, animosity to hate spectrum, I should
right.
say, where it's like you're making it personal versus like,
Yeah.
oh dang it, that was a strategy I would not have done, or
Right. And as like, as I say, a passionate sports fan, as angry or as elated as I can get,
sure,
I can see why someone would break their TV. I don't think I'd ever go that far, particularly
yeah,
because it's expensive. But I watch those videos and think, oh my God, that guy's insane. I understand it. It's that
yeah,
next step of actually directly contacting, even if it's over social media, an athlete directly and being like, you suck. You should even just a mean thing as like you're trash. Even if it's not threatening them
yeah.
directly, it still just seems to me just too far. And I think it's almost like
I think there's a level of intentionality about it. Where in
right.
the sense like you shouldn't break your like I think breaking your TV after if your team loses a game is
Yeah.
extreme. Like don't do that.
Yeah.
It's a silly reaction if you
Hmm.
do that. But I think it's you're in the moment, you're not thinking about it,
Right.
whatever. Versus like taking the time to open up
Hmm.
your phone and to think up something mean to say
Right.
and send it out.
Hmm.
I also think people can do that in the moment and then afterwards not like what they did.
Right.
But I do think it's another level of, wow, that's not a cool thing to do.
Absolutely.
You have some work to do to
Yeah.
be a
And
better person, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. And transitioning a bit into
Sure.
my main kind of thesis is things like that. I think probably genuinely can affect athletes in a negative way.
Yeah.
And while that probably isn't the worst, I've seen a lot of things where, like, say, example, post injury, a lot of players aren't as good. While usually that's because of the physical limitations, a lot of arguments have been made that athletes like won't go for things they used to go for because of that injury, because they like remember at somewhere there's consciously or subconsciously that pain. And so I think that's an argument for why, if you've ever heard the concept of the yips, I don't know if you're
I have not
familiar.
actually.
Okay, I'd love to explain this. So the yips is kind of this. The yips is like the cursed word. Essentially, the yips is when an athlete, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Space Jam. This is a very random pull,
I'm
but
I have actually not seen it, but I'm
okay.
familiar. I know what.
So in the
Yeah.
original Space Jam, the plot goes that these aliens come in and they steal these star basketball players' talent. And there's a movie scene where you see these actual star athletes like playing horribly, like they've
Right.
forgotten how to play. When that happens in real life, it's called the yips.
Okay, they like
So
lost their
yeah, when an
groove or
athlete who is paid professionally to play a sport suddenly seemingly loses all ability, and when it's like kind of bad, it's usually called a slump. But the yips is where like just complete disaster, where a
yeah,
professional athlete just can't even handle the most basic
sure.
task of the game. For example, there was this pitcher who one time messed up his throw to first, which is like a very routine thing where just like the runner takes too big of a lead off, you throw to first to like keep them close to the base, so it's harder for them to steal second. And after he threw to first and messed up the throw, it was just something got in his own head, and he like couldn't throw to first after that for years.
Yeah.
A very routine play, couldn't do it.
So there's actually, I very briefly, this made me
Mm.
think of a connection for me. So I play piano,
Mm.
and I would be able to memorize pieces no
Mhm.
problem, and like muscle memory, I could
Mhm.
given enough practice time, I'd memorize a piece, I'd play it. And one time, when I was like probably 13,
Mhm.
there was a piece that I was performing for an adjudication. So there was someone
Ooh.
monitoring my. It
Yeah.
wasn't a full recital. There was only like an adjudicator and my teacher and a couple other people there. But I forgot
Ooh.
how to play the piece like, halfway
Yeah.
through, and I couldn't. I like tried to. There's some things you could do in piano if you forget how to like forget where you are on the piece. You can
Mhm.
kind of slip back into a previous spot and then
Right.
hope you get back on the track.
Yeah.
I tried that a couple times and it was just gone.
Yeah.
And after that, I would get nervous before every recital because before I would not get nervous.
Oh wow.
And then I just like you
Yeah.
said, I lost the kind of intuition that I used to have with playing a memorized piece,
Yeah.
and then
Absolutely.
it had an effect going forward. So
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And the kind of reason I have for believing that like the yips is really just a mental thing, I also can talk about like the opposite of that. Like baseball is a very superstitious sport,
Right.
according to the rumors, and there's actually a very very recent example. It's very topical. The Minnesota Twins were, and I actually have this screenshot on my phone so I get
Sure.
these numbers correct, but the Minnesota Twins, as of April 25th, which was a few weeks ago, were 10-13. So they have a losing record. They're not playing well at all.
Mm-hmm.
And this one athlete on the team does a commercial. And in this commercial, it's like a sausage company. It's this weird kind of sausage you don't have to refrigerate. He just does a regular commercial. And as like a thank you, they give him some for free. And so he brings one into the clubhouse, puts it in like the team fridge. No one really eats it. It ends up in like the dugout. Like, kind of for people who are not familiar with dugout, kind of like a sideline in most other sports, just where all the players hang out in between like innings and such when they're not on the field. And it was just sitting there on the bench, and one of the players touched it, hit a home run. Another player touched it, hit a home run, like back-to-back home runs. And since then, it became this like fun team thing where they'd all touch the sausage before
Yeah.
they'd go and hit. And the following week, after touching that sausage, from April 25th to May 8th, 9-game win streak. 9 straight
And
wins.
this is like last month.
Yeah, like
Wow.
this May 8th.
That's
Yeah, as it was a
crazy.
few weeks ago. And they went from last in their division to second in their division in just that 1 week. 9 games straight of great hitting. They were playing fantastically, and I actually have I don't know if this will show up well, but I have a picture of the sausage
Yeah,
in the
I'll probably
dugout.
see a little bit of that. Yeah.
And what players would not only touch it before hits, but when they hit a home run, they'd celebrate with it. It's like they throw the sausage from the dugout. I have a picture of that as well. I don't know if you can really see it, but a player holding the sausage after hitting a
Nice.
home run. But
Showing it off.
yeah, and so there are a lot of other examples of like superstitions like that in baseball. But for me, like kind of almost like the anti-yips of you touch the sausage and all of a sudden everyone on the team's hitting so well, you go from a losing record
It's
to 9
confidence
straight
thing.
wins.
They're like,
Yeah, I think it's entirely
Yeah.
mental, and like the placebo effect, right?
right,
Like if you
right.
believe it enough, you believe that the sausage for whatever reason helps, then it does.
Yeah.
Like a confidence thing, a placebo thing, and I think it works equally both ways. Where if you get in your own head about something that's supposed to be routine as an athlete, something that's subconscious and just muscle memory, all of a sudden you're in your own head. you'll mess up the simplest thing. But if you can get that confidence, whether it's like self-confidence or a superstition, it helps so dramatically.
Yeah.
It's kind of unbelievable almost. And it's just like having that, it's all mental. No matter what part of the mentality, what part of the brain, conscious, subconscious, it's all mentality. There's no other explanation in my mind for why a player could have the yips, and then other players could have where they touch a sausage and magically they're better, right? I mean, of course, not to diss luck or superstition. I'm sure maybe
It's
the
fun.
sausage has
It's
powers,
cool,
but
yeah.
I really do believe the most rational explanation is just, at least mostly, it's a mentality thing entirely, and it makes such a dramatic difference in athletic performance. Just your mindset, how you're doing mentally at the time. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, we're actually coming up on time here.
Oh, great.
So,
Here, I have my
your
item.
object?
So it's a little smiley face ball. As silly as it seems, because I really do think that, and there are actually a lot of mentalists now in sports. I'll very, very briefly, Lindsay Ellis is an athlete who is one of the most dominant snowboarders in all of snowboard cross, which is just like a snowboard race, essentially, down a mountain. And her, at very first Olympics, at a very young age, she had first place secured. She was way ahead, and she did like a fancy little trick, like a heel grab, where she like grabbed her board as she was in the air, and she crashed. She fell, and she was fine, but she lost the race. And because of that loss, she was destroyed by the media. Like, she did like a showboaty trick that lost her the race.
Yeah.
And so because of that, she got in her head. And between Olympics, she was consistently winning the same event, but in X Games, which is every year. She won, like, I think it was like 50, I have to, double check, but like, I think approximately 15 gold medals over the course of the next, like, 2 decades. Dominant, insanely dominant, every year consistently winning.
Yeah.
But when the Olympics would roll around, all that extra added pressure would happen the first time, she would lose. And often in spectacular fashion, crashing, just completely failing. And finally, before her last Olympics, as I believe she was in her late 30s at the time, far from her prime, she entered her last Olympics. She'd hired a mentalist, like a mental coach, to help her with her mentality. And in her final Olympics, she won. She got the gold. So I think it's just a great story that goes to show how important your mentality is as an athlete, and how important it is now in the world of sports, mental coaches, and taking care of your mental health. I think it's just a really awesome example of that.
In the sense that people have that skill in them. It's just a matter of being in the right mindset to unlock it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As we close out here, Theron, what are you looking forward to?
Graduation.
Yeah?
Yeah, I am struggling through my last academic quarter here at Western. I can't wait to get through it.
What are you doing after you graduate?
Oh man, I did apply to a grad school for sports journalism, specifically sports broadcast journalism.
Oh, fun.
With all the theater stuff I've done, I love to be on the air.
Right.
As a sports person, like, getting to interview athletes, or like, being in front of a camera, getting to talk about sports would be a dream. So I hope going into like a grad program for that would give me the skills I need to actually do that as a profession.
Cool. All right. Well, I hope to see you on the news someday.
Oh, thank you. I would love to.
As a host, not as a criminal or something.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Theron.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.